Thank you. Please be seated. And thank you to David Ziggy Walcott on the pan today. Today, Friday, August the 11th, is a day of very special significance. And it's special significance for Caribbean culture because today has been officially declared as World Steel Pan Day by the United Nations. The steel pan, of course, that deserves a clap. It is a uniquely Caribbean instrument developed in Trinidad and Tobago, but embraced by the whole region. And of course, it is unique insofar as it is the only musical instrument invented in the 20th century. Really symbolic and representative of our rich musical heritage in the Caribbean. I think you can clap for that too. The Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Barbados and Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment. The Honorable Sir Patterson Cheltenham, Chief Justice. The Honorable Dale Marshall, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. Senator the Most Honorable Jerome Walcott, Minister of Health and Wellness. The Honorable Kerry Simmons, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. The Honorable Ryan Strawn, Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. The Honorable Colin Jordan, Minister of Labour, Social Security and the Third Sector. Senator the Honorable Lisa Cummins, Minister of Energy and Business. Dr. Kevin Greenidge, Governor of the Central Bank. Other ministers of government and senior officials. Mr. Sergio Díaz-Granados, Executive President of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. Dr. Christian Asinelli, Corporate Vice President of CAF. Dr. Stacy Richards Kennedy, Regional Manager for the Caribbean of CAF and the CAF delegation. Esteemed members of the Diplomatic Corps of Barbados, heads and representatives of international organizations. Mr. Dennis Zulu, Ms. Tawny Broadber, and Professor Clive Landis, and distinguished panelists, specially invited guests, members of the media, friends all. Good morning. My name is Alex Jordan. On behalf of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the government of Barbados, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to the presentation of the Economy and Development Report entitled Inherited Inequalities, the Role of Skills, Employment, and Wealth in the Opportunities of New Generations. The report analyzes the main barriers that perpetuate differences in the conditions of origin, that is, social, educational, ethnic, and geographical, among others. Moreover, it proposes three crucial areas of public policy to improve social mobility in the region: leveling conditions in the formation of human capital, improving the functioning of labor markets, and providing better savings conditions for all inhabitants of Latin America and the Caribbean. We will have leading speakers joining us today to analyze the issue of persistent inequality. We'll be discussing policies to ensure access to better opportunities for new generations. We would like to invite all attendees, of course, to share your opinions on social media. You were using the hashtag RedCAF, that's all in capitals, RedCAF, and please follow our account, which is @AgendaCAF, and that's on Facebook, on X, and on Instagram. X is the platform formerly known as Twitter, for those who don't know. I'd like to also welcome all of those watching via streaming through our website. That's on caf.com/en, and also watching on our YouTube channel. Great to have you all here. Now I would like to invite firstly to deliver our opening remarks, Mr. Sergio Díaz-Granados, Executive President of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, Prime Minister, the Republic of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Motley, Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, the Honorable Ryan Strong, Vice President of CAF, Christian Asinelli, other members of Cabinet and government officials, heads of international organizations and members of the diplomatic corps, members of CAF's team, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. I would like to begin by thanking the government of Barbados for your very warm welcome. Thank you, Prime Minister Motley, and thank you, Minister Strong, to you and to the leaders from various sectors of the country who are with us today. This is my first visit to Barbados as CAF Executive President, and the first visit by any president in the history of CAF. And I can assure you that this is the first of many more to come along this promising journey of partnership. It is a journey about which I'm personally excited, having grown up in Santa Marta, a seaport near in the Caribbean coast of Colombia. Last month, on the 4th of July, during the CARICOM Heads of Government meeting in celebration of the CARICOM 50th anniversary, we shared with our Caribbean brothers and sisters a milestone in CAF history. Our official updated CAF logo and trademark brand, now Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is much more than a name change. It marks the evolution of our relationship with the Caribbean and our commitment as a regional organization. It also represents who we are as CAF, our essence, and a renewed alignment with the needs of the region. We are strengthening even more our relation with the Caribbean, starting with our current shareholder countries, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and also reaching out to the rest of CARICOM to bring them into our CAF family. CAF is currently Trinidad and Tobago, for example, the main development partner with a portfolio of close to $1 billion. We plan to deepen our work there and expand it across the region, complementing the work of the Caribbean Development Bank, the IDB, and other partners institutions. The objective is to address the financial needs of our stakeholders as best as possible, facilitating progress and improved quality of life for all Caribbean people. And we are realizing this vision through concrete action. Last November, we launched our regional office for the Caribbean in Port Spain under the leadership of Dr. Tthis Richards Kennedy, who is here with us today, and with the support of her team, and Bernardo Requena, that is also in our office in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Stacy, for spearheading this event and for your leadership. We are working on setting up an office for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean islands in the near future, and as a regional manager and advisor to the Executive President, Stacy is helping us to guide in this process. Within the framework of CARICOM, we have held meetings with prime ministers and finance ministers of the countries to learn more about their needs and development priorities, as well as to respond to the growing interest in joining CAF as shareholders. For this reason, in March this year, for the first time, we approved a non-reimbursable technical assistance facility to provide dedicated support to CARICOM countries that are not yet members of CAF. And this is because bringing the Caribbean closer to CAF is a priority. We are committed to doing our part to channel greater resources to our shareholder countries, to protect Caribbean citizens from hurricane, floods, and droughts, and to preserve, of course, natural capital. Mobilizing financing to further strengthen the resilience of the entire region through institutions such as the Barbados-led Blue-Green Bank is a priority to us. This is why I'm pleased to announce today that CAF will participate as a financier and investor with up to $50 million matching Barbados' financial effort in this important initiative for financing resilient infrastructure and the blue economy. We reaffirm the commitment to continue promoting the actions and purpose set forth in the Bridgetown Initiative. An example of what we can achieve is the materialization of the Global Gateway Initiative, which brings together 112 lines of action covering all the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. We have just returned from Brussels, from the CELAC EU Business Roundtable, which we organized jointly with the European Union and the IDB. Within the framework of the EU-CELAC Summit, we continue the dialogue around what more we, development banks, do to be more relevant and effective in supporting the great global challenge and highly vulnerable states that face fiscal constraints. In response to your urgent call, Prime Minister Motley, I wish to assure you that we gave continuity to the work that, under your leadership, has already begun in June in Paris, in the Summit for a New Global Financing Pact, and that we will now continue in Cartagena in September within the framework of the Finance in Common Summit, and later with the European Latin America Finance Minister gathering, which will meet for the first time next month, September, in Santiago de Compostela. And we are looking, of course, to see you there, dear Minister Strong, with us in Santiago de Compostela discussing all these issues. It is important to note that CAF is more than a bank. It is an institution, an indigenous institution that amplifies the voice of the region, a platform that is putting the interests of the region at the center of the global conversation, and that today operates as a regional forum for debates and ideas on the building of consensus. CAF is committed to promoting sustainable development and green and inclusive growth. 40% of our approvals by 2026 will be green and blue, among which, as I said earlier, we expect to include the Blue-Green Bank initiative from Barbados. We are also a bank that is driven by knowledge, and this is exactly why we are here in Barbados today. Our report, the RED, is our annual flagship report on economy and development, and has been produced for 20 years with the aim of putting at the service of Latin America and the Caribbean useful tools for defining and evaluating public policies. The one that summons today, we have called it Inherited Inequalities. CAF is committed moving forward to expand the coverage of the analysis and data across the Caribbean, including non-member countries, with the aim of providing governments and policymakers with relevant information for development planning. Promoting prosperity, sustainability, and peace require a comprehensive understanding of all the factors that generate inequality, especially those that are inherited and entrenched in our societies. Latin America and the Caribbean as a region has significant social disparities, and inequality is high, but especially persistent. There are exceptional cases, such as Barbados, where rapid and notable progress has been made toward greatest income equality, thanks to the firm commitment to education that has been made. I know that is something in your heart, Prime Minister, education, always. And deciding to host the Caribbean regional launch of the RED in Barbados was therefore an easy choice for the team. We need to show to the region that we are able to reach those objectives. Barbados is an example in the region how to break down inherited inequalities. More and better education equals greater equality, and is the best possible investment. The challenge of creating societies that remain on the path of sustainable and inclusive growth is multidimensional. We face common problems, but they manifest themselves in different ways, depending on the context, especially in small islands. As highlighted in the RED, the high and persistent inequalities in Latin America and the Caribbean are generated through three channels that strongly link the well-being levels of parents and children, producing intergenerational ties that create significant barriers for disadvantaged families to prosper. The three channels emphasized in the report are possibilities for human capital formation, labor opportunities, and opportunities for savings and wealth accumulation. Promoting more and better opportunities, early, basic, and higher education, combined with actions to promote youth and women's employment in the most thriving sector of local economies, are areas of work that can continue to strengthen to ensure a better future for Caribbean youth. By launching today, we are truly pleased to make this CAF document available to the Caribbean, and we stand ready to continue learning from you and to advance on this hopeful path for development and well-being. We are aware that we'll need more disaggregated data to support more targeted policymaking and development interventions. This is one of the biggest challenges we face in our work of CAF with the countries of the region. We plan to strengthen the data and the analysis for the Caribbean in our future reports and look forward to working closely with the key partners such as the University of West Indies, and we have with Stacy the opportunity during the 5th anniversary of CARICOM to talk with the principal in how to do this together, working closely with the West Indies University. An example of the differentiated perspective which we must approach our work is vulnerability to climate change. And this is a threat with many faces. South America is facing water crisis due to the longest drought in recent decades. In contrast, the Caribbean is experiencing devastating storm and floods. The approach to country must be different, and development banks can't ignore that reality. CAF is a solutions-driven bank, very agile, flexible, and innovative in its approach. We must cooperate more, innovate boldly, and make the best use of the capital that your countries have invested in multilateral institutions. We are proud of the historic step we took less than an hour ago between Barbados and CAF, formalizing Barbados' capital increase in keeping with the decision taken by our board in March 2022 to expand the CAF capital base by an additional $7 billion, the largest ever in the history of the institution, and this will allow to double our portfolio to $60 billion by 2030. I want to thank for your trust and your commitment to all the government of Barbados, and we look forward to working with you, Prime Minister, and your team to address the development priorities of Barbados. To Prime Minister Motley, once again, thank you for hosting us and for joining us to the launch of this report. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Muchas gracias, Señor Presidente. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for a grand opening. It is my honor now to welcome to the stage to say a few remarks the Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of the Republic of Barbados.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was about to say, did you choose to be here rather than the West Indies-India cricket game? If so, then I think that you're backing a winner. I want to welcome, good morning everyone, all protocols observed. I want to welcome in particular my dear friend, the Executive President of CAF, with whom over the last few months, I believe that we have found synergy in so many different things, and I thank you for your friendship and support to our country and at a personal level as well. Stacy, I am almost thinking that you are living here already, and I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but the truth is that I said to the others when I came into this room, I'm beginning to like Fridays. And they asked why. I said, because last Friday we announced the Africa Exim Bank opening in Barbados, and this Friday we can now share with the rest of Barbados that the Latin American Development Bank will be establishing an office in Barbados as well. This speaks volumes to the confidence that others have in not only the management of this society and economy, but also the trajectory, the direction in which we are going. We've also in the last week been able to benefit from an upgrade in our credit ratings from Moody's, which is also a matter that would give, I'm sure, the members of this bank and other financial institutions great comfort that Barbados is moving in the right direction. There's no doubt that the last few years have been difficult. Some might even use the word that the former Queen of England News when she said it was an annus horribile. The truth is, it was many years that have been horrid. And we live in a completely different world from that which many of us expected to be living in the third decade of the 21st century. I don't think anyone in this room would have believed that we would have had almost 3 years of restrictive movement and all kinds of public health restrictions imposed on us if we asked you, even in the year 2015 or 2018, would you see an equivalent to what happened in the world 100 years ago with the Spanish flu? But we have gone through it, and we are here. And the reality is that we are showing ourselves to be far more resilient than others have believed. But then again, when you look even at the crops that grow in our part of the world, the reality is that on small islands, they have to learn to become tolerant to salt and sea breeze. They have to learn invariably to become tolerant to drought. They have to learn to become tolerant to hard conditions and harsh conditions. We talk with respect to humans of inherited inequalities. The plants and fauna, flora and fauna can tell us about inherited hardships. By the same token, what has come out of it is the glory of being resilient. And I want us to recognize that a large part of the success of the journey going forward is a mental landscape that we keep in our heads, the approach that we will have towards resolution of many of the issues and creation of opportunities for us. It was only 2 days ago, or yesterday in fact, that we were making the point that many of the greatest achievements have come by identifying the opportunities out of hardship, by identifying what can be the solutions to ease the burden and ease the pain of others. And in a very real sense, we have therefore to use this opportunity of polycrisis to be able to reframe and recast our societies in a way that we would ultimately feel comfortable in so doing. The truth is that these are disruptors. And the biggest disruption came, for example, in my view, apart from the health-related concerns, which were very patent and obvious, but came in the disruption that forced us to move more rapidly from an analog society to a digital society. By the same token, that also reflected even more harshly the inequalities that exist within our countries, largely because not many people would have been able, or not many countries would have been able to guarantee equitable access to digital devices for all of their school children. I shudder to think what will be the consequences thereto, because we have not yet started to see them. Just for a minute, think of a 12-year-old child or an 11-year-old child entering first or second form in 2020 and not being able to have face-to-face conversations in a classroom until 2023, when they're in class 4 or class 5. It effectively means that for the majority of their secondary school life, they did not learn the socio-cultural skills that are necessary to navigate life, that are a critical part of any child going through school. And we have to begin to understand how we are going to compensate for that deficit if we are to ensure that our societies don't become victims in the long run, as a result of this awful experience that the pandemic hoisted on us. We in Barbados, and you've correctly said, Mr. President, that we have invested heavily in education throughout our journey as a democratic state and as a post-independent state. And I say democratic state because when given the right to vote across the entire country through universal adult suffrage, apart from the settlement of labor rights, and the fairness necessary for the workplace to contrast from the very rough exploitative customs that were inherited from slavery, apart from those labor rights, the biggest investment came in the development of capacity for secondary school education. I will not be unfair, because the truth is that one of the benefits of being one of the first colonies for settlement by the British was that they did, in order to be able to keep people, I imagine, relatively docile on 166 square miles, they invested heavily in primary education. They, the government, that is, as well as the churches, the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church, the Moravian Church. The reality was that by the year 1900, Barbados had 200 primary schools on 166 square miles, more than one primary school per square mile. Secondly, we had 6 secondary schools and 1 tertiary level institution, namely Codrington College, that was linked to the University of Durham, hence providing the institutional infrastructure for primary to tertiary, even if not the equitable access for the majority of our people. I say this because one of the things that we have not focused sufficiently on in the region is truly the building of institutions. And the institutions, strong institutions, lead to strong societies more often than not. And those strong institutions that have an equitable and progressive outlook become the bedrock for growth and mobility and fairness in most societies. It is true that you can have strong institutions that support apartheid, but that is where I anchor it with respect to the moral outlook that is also necessary. We, therefore, have benefited in education from those strong institutions. And in the post-democratic period, the post-1951 period, the construction of 4 major public secondary schools permitted then the father of independence, Mr. Barrow, to be able to agree that access to those schools should be free and that all Barbadians, irrespective of their right, of where they've been born, would be able to have the right to participate in primary and secondary education, and added to that came soon tertiary education. It is no secret that this government, in the first 3 months of its existence, in spite of an IMF program, reintroduced free tertiary education so that the students attending the University of the West Indies and those going to the post-secondary institutions would not need to find money in order to be able to participate. We've added to that during COVID by extending 15,000 courses offered by Coursera through the National Transformation Initiative to be accessible by every Barbadian who wants to be able to access it. We have done a lot with respect to the institution. But with every institution, there comes a time too when further work and refinement or repurposing is critical. And it is no secret, therefore, that this government's major wish for education reform will be put on the table very shortly. The Ministry of Education has been spending the last year in deep, deep consultation at the level of all of the stakeholders, from the unions, to the principals, to the teachers, to the students, to the rest of the society in terms of employers and civil society, recognizing that what we are doing is a once in 50-year, 60-year exercise that is necessary to be able to fine-tune so that those people who are now falling through the cracks, will be able to be captured. In reflecting on this topic, it struck me that this book has a chapter on segregation. What's segregation got to do with education? Well, this book addresses it. And it addresses it because for too many countries, including our own, the system that we have places, regrettably, on the basis of academic performance alone, people together who are either high achievers or low achievers. And that is the form of segregation that, if not disrupted, can cement itself into other consequences in the society that will not make for true development in our countries. Against that backdrop, our government believes that we have, therefore, to be able to create the opportunity where every Bajan young student can use the words of NTI, can be a star. Every Bajan student can attend, ultimately, schools of excellence that will allow them to become the best in class for what they do, whether that is plumbing or whether that is physics, whether that is acting or sports, or whether that is geography, humanities, music. It does not matter. Commerce, IT, robotics. But what we must start to do is to be able to create the opportunity for our students to believe that they constitute the leadership of this country, all. Not the cabinet, not the prime minister, not the heads of the corporate or the labor movement, but every Barbadian young child, taking the words of Mahatma Gandhi, become the change that we want to see in this society. Now that is going to require deeper investment and involvement, and we will have an opportunity at a future stage to speak about that. What I will say is that we are conscious that as we evolve in this multi-year reform effort, that we need to be able to also make sure that we do not lose those who are not yet going to be part of the reform, but who nevertheless are still in school. And to that extent, my government has been reflecting on where the greatest hardships come now within the educational system to students and to families, and we've determined that it is in the area of a long-lost lacuna that we have not truly been focusing on throughout the years. All of us who went to school here in secondary school, and I don't see anybody who probably was there before, but I'm prepared to be corrected. I think I have enough gray hair, therefore, to associate myself with it. But all of us went to school and got, at secondary school, a textbook loan scheme. You paid what, $75? And you got all of the books that you needed for the year. So that that mother or that father who was a single parent, earning $2,000 a month or less, or $2,500 a month or less, got to buy food, got to pay rent or mortgage, got 3 children. How the hell are they going to afford to buy all the books they need for secondary school? And we take these things for granted, that this country has been able to provide this in order to fight inherited inequalities, in order to lift people from the bowels of poverty, and to give them an opportunity, not just for themselves, but for any children that they bring into this world, and for all those that they choose beyond their duty to themselves and their family to be able to assist in the community or the churches in which they operate. The bottom line is that while we were able to do that marvelously well at the secondary level, we never applied it to the primary level. And at the primary level, therefore, the hardship endures and continues for too many parents in this country. We can't go exactly where we want nowadays in one fell swoop, but we can go there in the direction, as I've just shown you, by the confidence that has been expressed in our management of this economy. We can go there in 2 or 3 steps. The ultimate step is for us to convert the secondary textbook loan scheme into a digital loan scheme, a digital access for textbooks at the secondary level, but also at the primary level. But we are not yet fully there, and while the ministry does its work to carry us there, I'm asking, therefore, and I've asked the minister in the Ministry of Finance, for us to make available with immediate effect from from this financial year and this academic year, a grant of $100 per student for the primary school, for each parent, for each primary school child who has to buy books to participate in the primary school system. I'm told by the Chief Education Officer that the average spend can vary between $200 to $250 for most primary schools. We know that there are some schools that oversupply books and require parents to spend $400 and $500, but most of those tend to be private as opposed to public primary schools. The average spend in the public primary school is between $200 to $250. What is anticipated is that parents will produce their receipts to the schools, and once they produce the receipts, the school, and the money is in excess of the $100, the school will certify and make the arrangements, and we will then, over the course of the month of September into early October, we will need about 4 weeks to be able to manage it. I'm telling you up front, in order to ensure that those students' parents or guardians be the recipient of that $100 scheme. This goes to further reducing inherited inequalities. Because if you can't get out of primary school learning, you're not going to learn in secondary school. You're not going to get that opportunity easily to go into post-secondary institutions. And therefore, when we say that we are trying to battle the inequalities one by one, these are the examples of it that we are showing. With respect to housing, we have started the process through the catastrophe fund by ensuring that the catastrophe fund does not only look at post-damage, but also preventing damage. And to that extent, we are using the catastrophe fund to be able to ensure that those houses that want to be able to ensure that they have the hurricane straps, those below a certain income level, the government takes responsibility for them. Those above a certain income level, the loan scheme can go there as well. Similarly, with the conversion of the water conservation culture that we must have to the water conservation culture that we must have, we are equally trying to ensure that the Barbados Water Authority establishes a loan fund that will allow households to be able to lend, to borrow, to put in tanks and water-saving devices in the bathrooms and kitchen to ensure that we can reduce the absolute volume of water that we are using in this country. I stood on this same spot a few months ago and reminded the country that between January and May, Barbados had literally half of the rainfall this year that we would have had in the last 30 years, the average in the last 30 years for the first 5 months of the year. This climate crisis is real. And I therefore want to thank the CAF, want to thank the bank again for agreeing now to also invest in the Blue-Green Investment Bank that the Barbados government has literally shepherded through the Green Climate Fund. And they have also agreed to give and to seed that entity, the Green Climate Fund, with $15 million US. And with CAF, we have now received news today that they also will put $15 million into the Blue-Green Investment Bank, whether as both equity or seed capital loans. We will negotiate the exact terms. But the reality is that with our government using $15 million from our SDRs coming out of the Resilient Sustainability Trust, and $15 million from GCF, $15 million from CAF, $2.5 million from USAID, we're well on the way to being able to attract other donor countries as well as institutions, such that this Blue-Green Bank becomes a major source of fast funding for Caribbean countries, Eastern and Southern Caribbean countries. We started with Barbados, but the aim is to move to the Eastern and Southern Caribbean so that we can make sure that we become resilient in fighting this climate crisis. This is therefore a matter of which we can say thank you, thank you, thank you to CAF. I want to make one last comment before leaving you this morning and expressing my absolute pleasure in being associated with the launching of this report. You could not have wanted a better name, a better theme, and a better location. There is literally a reflection of the essence of what Barbados' development has been for the last 56, 60 years, 70 years if I go back to the post-democratic state. We have seen people in this country across governments. We've heard people and we've felt people. And we've been able to put people at the center of our development, which is why we continue to score highly on the Human Development Index. But we are still doing ourselves a serious disservice because we're not capturing the data even accurately enough. And it may sound strange to those who are visiting us because on the face of it, our data still puts us above most. But I know from where I stand that we are not capturing the data sufficiently. And I know from where I stand that data is pivotal to good policy and to being able to create the space that is necessary to continue the journey of removing people from poverty and putting people into prosperity. Because you can come out of poverty and not necessarily get to prosperity. And that is why I keep telling people as I go around the country that cash is not wealth. When you start to move that cash and assets to another generation, talk to me. And therefore, we are still very, very early in the journey of being able to build prosperity among our people. But one of the key things is data. And I look through this book and I see data for all the Latin American countries easily. But we in the Caribbean have not developed a sufficient culture of data. And I say so conscious that Barbados has done better than most, particularly in the areas of public health and education. But we need to do better. And the central bank governor, I believe, in his last press conference may have shared that we are also asking the Statistical Service and the country to us to look at remeasuring our economy. The last remeasurement came in the year 2010 when Prime Minister Thompson announced the results, which clearly showed that we were not capturing sufficient aspects of our informal economy. Regrettably, we're back at that stage again, where a lot of our economic activity remains underground or informal, and in fact would have exacerbated during the course of the COVID pandemic. My brothers and sisters, there has been no government that has reduced corporation taxes to as low as the corporation taxes that exist in Barbados today are. There is no government that has reduced income taxes as low as we have reduced it. Bajans do not pay the first $25,000 in income tax, and those earning $25,000 and less get a reverse tax credit to offset the value-added tax increases that they will face in the purchase of normal goods and services for their family. And very often, that reverse tax credit, which was in fact stopped, became a useful source of funds for most families at the very time when they needed it for this same back-to-school effort in September. We increase the amount of the reverse tax credit, and we increase the range of persons who could benefit from it. We introduced what I call a WISE tool, a compensatory income credit for those earning between $25,000 and $35,000, so long as the government's cash flow can accommodate it in any fiscal year. People earning between $25,000 and $35,000 get back 100% of the taxes, income taxes that they would have paid. All of these things should tell you that we're not looking to capture you into the tax net more. But if you don't give us the data, we can't record the successes and we can't make the case for qualification or pre-qualification on a range of things. And it's as a result of that that the government is looking now to increase the civil penalties. In fact, we're going to move from criminal convictions, because that approach of criminal convictions for every breach of a regulatory matter is an old colonial approach that we are not carrying into the new republic. And we've said, whether it is in the integrity bill and a whole host of other pieces of legislation that we're bringing, we use civil penalties rather than fine and confine and criminal conviction, because that was a colonial approach to how you see people in your country and trying to control. But what we do need are the civil penalties, because there are too many companies who just say, oh, I ain't got time for that. I'll get to that next week. I'll get to that next month, next year, without realizing that our inability to capture data affects the opportunities that the country can have going forward. These reports need data. You can't star in these reports without data. And therefore, I'm asking through this medium, whether it's in the social sphere or the economic sphere, the private sector, the labor movement, government departments too, because there are a number of government departments that have gotten very lazy. And I've said to the ministers, clean up or else. Because the bottom line is we need data to govern well. And that is why by next year, we hope to establish a statistics and big data independent authority that will not be an agency of government as the statistics department is, but will be an independent entity that will guarantee the integrity of data. That is how serious we are approaching this issue. So my friends at CAF, I hope that by the next time you do these reports, that even though we've been able to give you some data, that we can give you even more accurate data that captures the reality of what is happening on the ground in this country. And I look forward, therefore, to also being part and parcel of that crusade across the English-speaking Caribbean, because it is a huge deficit. And I hope that the University of the West Indies can recognize that there has to be an ethical approach to the treatment, first of all, the collection and then treatment of data, and that every student coming through your organization, your institution, regardless of which campus or open campus, should be allowed to recognize that this is a critical building block to the development of our societies. I want to thank you because, as I said, this notion of seeing people, hearing people, and feeling people and understanding their journey is captured in this title alone. Anybody who understands the Caribbean and Latin America knows that the level of inherited inequalities from 400 to 500 years of exploitation are huge. And that while we have been able in the last 60 to 70 years to put many people on the train, there are still others who have not gotten on the train yet. And the last point I'd like, therefore, to make is that in highlighting this, I hope that our philanthropic bodies, but our families across this nation will understand that Barbados has one clear example that we must continue to promulgate and to promote. We win when we do it together. Not government alone, not private sector alone, not labor movement alone, but when we come together, we always win. We did it when we were faced with the reduction in the value of our exchange rate as being the next necessary step to stabilize this economy when we won the government. And it was in that room upstairs on the 1st of June, 2018, that Labor, Capital, and government came together and said, we are going to fight this together to avoid an exchange rate devaluation. We did it in this room again when we came together, and at the Hilton here and at the Hilton, to deal with, in this room, it was to deal with, and Hilton, to deal with the COVID pandemic. I want to suggest that we can do it with the pension reform. And I hear all kinds of people speaking about it, but let me remind us that fundamentally what we are doing is not because we want to hurt people. We're not reducing a single benefit. But what we are trying to do is to ensure that benefits will be there when people most need them. And I say to you that when this country moves together across those three sectors, Barbados wins and Barbadians win. Let us therefore take heed. The very fact that this report anchors and reflects the things that we have done well and continue to do well tells us that if we drop the ball, then we will not be part and parcel of that brigade that can say they have been able to turn the corner with respect to many of these structural defects and blockages that prevent families and individuals and companies from moving to the next level. Thank you, therefore, CAF, for reminding us what really matters and for recognizing that this, along with the Sustainable Development Goals, are a mirror image of Barbados' development path. Thank you, and good luck as you go forward.
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. And here is to our nation's strong institutions and the glory of our resilience, dare I say, of which you are the living, breathing embodiment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start the presentation of CAF's Economy and Development Report, Inherited Inequalities, the role of skills, employment, and wealth in the opportunities of new generations. To start the report presentation, we invite Dr. Lucilla Burnell. She's Principal Economist of CAF's Socioeconomic Research Department. Dr. Burnell has a PhD and a master's degree in economics from Universidad Carlos III in Spain, and is a prominent researcher associated with several institutions in Spain and in her home country of Argentina. But before Dr. Burnell's presentation, we're just going to ask you please to turn your attention to the screen for a short video on the subject.
Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the most unequal regions in the world. This high inequality has deep roots and has passed from generation to generation, resulting in low intergenerational mobility. This is a far-reaching development problem because people's chances to progress compared to their parents not only impact equity, but also the growth, social cohesion, and political institutional stability of countries. What are the main causes of low intergenerational mobility in the region? CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, presents the Economy and Development Report 2022, Inherited Inequalities. The role of skills, employment, and wealth in the opportunities for new generations. A document that provides a detailed analysis of social mobility in Latin America and the Caribbean and delves into its determinants, showing the influence of different factors in developing skills, accessing quality jobs, or accumulating wealth. How can gender, ethnicity, or place of residence and exposure to risks such as macroeconomic or climate change-related risks impact the intra-generational mobility of the Latin American and Caribbean population? What policies are needed to reduce the burden of inherited inequalities and ensure true opportunities for the new generations in the region? Economy and Development Report 2022. CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean.
It's working? So thank you everyone for being here. This is our red report entitled Inherited Inequalities, but this is just one of a series of reports that we produce every year and in which we analyze deeply an important topic for the development in Latin America, but our intention and what we have been doing is to focus more and more in topics that are also of the highest interest for the Caribbean countries, like inequality. If we order for a group of countries the population from the poorest person to the richest person in the population, we obtain for this group of Caribbean countries that the poorest 50% of the population receives 9% of the income and 4% of the wealth, contrasting very much with the shares that go to the top percent in this distribution. And if you want to look at the more dynamic evolution of income concentration, we can look at the Gini index, and this is the average of this index for the whole region, the Latin American and the Caribbean region. And we see some ups and downs, but for the Caribbean countries, and as was very clearly stated by the Prime Ministry, the data is very scarce, so we are not able to address this evolution, but we can say that there is a wide interval for values of the Gini index for the Caribbean countries, in which Haiti is at the top, meaning is the most unequal country in this region, while Barbados is at the bottom of this distribution of income concentration. But if we add to this figure the evolution of the Gini indexes for other regions in the world, we get to a conclusion that says that Latin America and the Caribbean is the most unequal region in the world. And this inequality is not only high, but it's persistently high. So in our view, we address this enduring inequality as a process of transmission between generations of certain attributes that will condition the levels of well-being of parents and children. Let me show you an example, a very simple example, in which we can see this transmission of inequalities. Here we have the distribution of educational level, very simple, in just two categories, for a group of very heterogeneous countries in the Caribbean region. And this is the distribution, this is the distribution for individuals that became parents during the 80s. And next, we have the same distribution for the children of those parents. And here, from now up to now, we only have these two distributions, but the key problem starts to appear when we connect these two distributions. So when we link inequalities in the educational attainment of these two generations. And here we find, for this group of countries, that 74% of individuals 74 or 3/4 of the individuals that have parents with high levels of education also end up having high levels of education, while among those that remain with low levels of education, 72% of them also have parents with low levels of education. And these numbers are high, but are lower than what we find for the rest of Latin American countries, for the rest of countries in Latin America, because these numbers in that case reach 84 and 92%. So in other words, persistence in inequality in education is high in the Caribbean, but it's not as high as in the case of Latin American countries, according to these measures. In the report, we go beyond education, and we also assess other dimensions of well-being that are very important, like health, occupation, income, and wealth. And we argue, as was also discussed by the Prime Ministry and the Executive President, that this very strong connection between the well-being of parents and children are important for three crucial aspects of any development process, because they affect this intergenerational persistence, or the possibilities of social mobility, affect equity, but also growth, and also social cohesion and institutional stability. So we think that this is a crucial topic to be analyzed and also to be understood more deeply, trying to assess what are the deep roots of this inequality, of this inequality transmission across generations. So what we do in the book is to take an approach that considers 3 channels that operates along the life cycles of individuals, but with different emphasis. The first one is the channel of human capital accumulation, that is very important very early in life until the transition into adulthood. And the other 2 are the channels of employment opportunities and the opportunities for wealth accumulation that, of course, in part stem from inequalities that are generated early in life, but contribute by themselves to magnify some of these inequalities later on in life. Additionally, we complement this approach by analyzing some circumstances that are beyond the control of the individuals and that in Latin America and the Caribbean contribute a lot to inequalities of opportunities, that is gender, place of residence, and ethnicity. And regarding human capital, the first of the 3 mechanisms that we analyze in the book, we can start by giving you some very simple numbers on a key pillar on the formation of human capital, that is education. I will show you here very simple measures on educational mobility, this measure of absolute mobility, that is the percentage of individuals who manage to finish or to complete an educational level that their parents did not. And as was already said, the data for the Caribbean region is quite scarce, so we have managed to produce, in addition to the numbers that are in the book, some extra information that can give an overview of the situation of the Caribbean countries in green in this sort of ranking on absolute mobility in primary education, in secondary education, and also in tertiary education. In the 3 levels of education, the case of Barbados stands out as a country with really high levels of mobility compared to other countries in the Caribbean, but also compared to other countries in Latin America as well. And these numbers that I just gave you are average numbers for countries, but the reality inside countries may be very, very different. Here I'm showing, again, this measure of absolute mobility, but for micro regions for which we were able to compute measures of absolute mobility, and the lighter the color, the more mobile is this micro region, and the darker, the less possibilities of educational mobility. And if we zoom in the Caribbean, we start to see, for some countries for which we have data, this is census data, that colors are light in some cases, but very dark in some others. In the case of Barbados, we also could make use of some additional data and assess spatial inequalities in the possibilities of educational mobility, comparing the situation in urban and rural areas. And again, in the Barbados case, these gaps seems to be very small. In fact, if anything, it seems that they are in favor of the rural areas. And in the case of another circumstance that is crucial in our analysis, that is gender, we estimate also measures of absolute mobility for the 3 levels of education. And we find a really good news for women because now females are much more likely than men to surpass or to obtain high education levels when their parents did not. So for every 100 males that complete a university degree when their parents did not, 170 women do the same. And for the case of Barbados, again, the pattern is similar. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that this is comparing what happened with women and men born in decades that go from 1930 up to 1990. So old people, young people. And this pattern that we find for women and men contrasts very much with what we find for occupational mobility and labor market outcomes, as I show you in a minute. In the book, we give these types of diagnosis, but we also propose some mechanisms that try to understand why is this, what are the key drivers or mechanisms behind the inequality condition. And in the case of human capital, we propose these three types of mechanisms related to restrictions on investments that parents can make inside home that, of course, may lead to some gaps that, if they are early, they will be very hard to be closed in the future, in particular regarding many domains of human capital accumulation, like the cognitive, physical, and social-emotional. This is data for the case of Barbados. Next, we have these other mechanisms that is related to what also the Prime Minister was saying about quality gaps that are very much related to segregation, and also higher education challenges that are related not only to quality, but also to funding, to informational barriers, to territorial supply gaps, and also to this challenge of maintaining an education that is relevant in the face of technological change. We have this other topic that is very much related to restricted decisions that parents can make regarding residence, and this is the problem or the issue of the neighborhood effect or the residence effect. We find that both physical and social environments play a crucial role in forming in the formation of human capital, and we give numbers to this importance, and we find that it's really dramatic what is the contribution of the environment to the formation of human capital, especially in the matters of health and social-emotional development. Regarding family formation patterns, we see that some types of family formation may exacerbate the effect problems imposed by the previous two restrictions, especially in the case of large or very high assortative mating, and also when early childbearing is prominent, which is the case in some Caribbean countries, but it is much worse the situation in the case of Latin American countries. Next, in each chapter, we have this diagnosis, and then we have a set of policy recommendations that in this case can be grouped in three types of policy recommendations. The first one are related, and all these recommendations are backed by very rigorous evidence on what works and what doesn't work. The first set of recommendations are related to alleviate the restrictions that parents face at home, in particular regarding financial restrictions, informative and cognitive and behavioral restrictions, and also restrictions related to insurance. The second set of policies are related to improvement in the supply of educational services, in particular trying to address the challenge of increasing the access, but maintaining or increasing quality, and also trying to provide skills that are relevant to the changing demands of labor in the labor market in the face of technological change. And last, we have this third group of policies that are related to but basically this third group are focused on spaces, on trying to improve habitat and also accessibility to key facilities that could improve or boost the formation of skills, in particular in the most disadvantaged areas of the countries and of the cities in the case of large urban areas. And regarding employment opportunities, in the book, we show that two individuals with similar levels of human capital may end up having very different labor market trajectories depending on factors that are out of their control. For instance, the gender, or the family background, or the place of residence. So we start by showing that the occupational persistence in the region is very high. 30% of Latin Americans share the occupational category with their parents. This number is at the top in the world if we compare with the cases of other regions. But not only that, in Latin America, it's very difficult to progress in occupational terms, and it's especially difficult for women. Here we have the probabilities of going or reaching high complexity occupations for males that have parents with low complexity occupations, or for parents that are, for individuals that have parents with high occupational complexity. So this odds ratio in the probabilities is 5. But for the case of women, we face two types of challenge. We have lower presence in high complexity occupations, independently of the occupation of our parents, and in addition, to progress occupationally is harder for women than males. So those ratios for women changes from 5 to 6. So this is in clear contrast to what we found about education. So the odds of educational mobility are higher for women, but the odds for occupational mobility are lower for women in the region. And in the case of employment opportunities, we propose these 3 channels. The first one is very much related to informational frictions, and also very much related to the pervasive informality that is present in our labor markets. The second one is related again to the lack of insurance against shocks like macroeconomic or technological shocks. And the third one is related to a persistence that has been overlooked in this literature before, but now is taking more and more importance. That is the persistence in the residence. Because many Latin Americans share the same context or the socioeconomic context with their parents. 1 out of 2 live in the same city, 45% of them live in the same neighborhood as their parents, and 1 out of 3 live in the same house. So it is very likely that they are exposed to the same type of labor markets, so they are exposed to the same good or bad labor market opportunities. And this is, of course, related to segregation, but also it is related to housing policies. And this problem is especially concerning for countries in which the dispersion of productivities across the space is large, as it may, for instance, be the case of Jamaica in this proxy of productivity, that is the share of complex occupations overall employment in each country. So, as before, we have this diagnosis, which is, of course, more profound from what I'm just showing here. But after this diagnosis, we always propose a set of policies that respond to this diagnosis. And in the case of employment opportunities, we have policies related to continuous job training, information and employment services, and the third set of policies is related to closing or reducing these gaps in productivity and these gaps in labor market opportunities across the space. And the last set of policies is connected to improvements in social protection and labor regulations, and it includes also policies that should help to better balance family and life, family and work life, because this is the way to improve female employment in the region. And regarding the third channel, you can imagine now that the 2 individuals with similar human capital, with similar labor market transitions, will end up having different levels of wealth accumulation, depending mostly on their family backgrounds. And this is what we find in the report. And again, we propose a number of mechanisms that can explain this persistence. And starting with inheritance, we show that inheritances account for a sizable part of the transmission of asset holdings. Also, we address the issue of credit access, and crucially, the issue of financial literacy, because more credit access without proper financial literacy or financial knowledge could be detrimental for the objectives of improving the mobility of wealth. In the case of Barbados, again, the data is quite scarce, but some recent surveys are showing that the levels of financial literacy in the country are relatively high, but still some socioeconomic gaps remain open. Again, and last, we have a channel or a mechanism that is related to shocks, to vulnerability, and to lack of insurance against shocks. The shocks that we analyze in this case are, for instance, macroeconomic, health, and natural disasters. These shocks, when they hit a family, they are and families that are not very well equipped or well prepared to cope with the consequences of these shocks, these families will sell off inefficiently some of their assets, and that will, of course, imply less transmission of wealth across generations. And in particular, the natural disasters can impact by themselves, can destroy a crucial asset that families in our region hold, like housing. So, and the evidence, again, for the Caribbean region regarding how important is this issue of vulnerability and the lack of insurance to cope with these risks is very scarce. But for instance, for the case of the COVID crisis, we find, based also on recent survey data from the IDB, that there is a prominent gradient, socioeconomic gradient, on the share of families that were well equipped to cope with the consequences, the short-term consequences of the COVID in the region. So this is talking about a deep problem that hopefully can be addressed with these types of policies that we propose next, that are related to taxation, to housing, to financial inclusion policies, and also housing. And last, again, the importance of strengthening the social protection in our countries, and also to implement measures to mitigate the vulnerabilities of families, in particular regarding health risk, macroeconomic risk, and also natural disasters. So just to conclude, regarding each one of these three channels, we see the situation of Barbados as an outstanding case in education, but still some challenges remain. In the case of the employment opportunities, as in many other countries in the region, labor markets still struggle to turn or to transform human capital into better income opportunities or labor opportunities, and the policy priorities should be around women and youth. Regarding wealth accumulation in the country, there are great opportunities to harness the very vibrant and robust growth of the financial sector in order to amplify or to achieve a more equitable financial inclusion. And regarding more general conclusions of the report, we find, of course, that inequalities is still very high, that it is transmitted from generation to generation, that these three channels play in very, very important roles, and that there is no silver bullet to end up or to break the intergenerational ties of inequality. But we do know that any policy that is aimed at reducing this transmission of inequality should tackle vulnerabilities and should also enhance different forms of social insurance across many different areas of policy. In fact, if we summarize all our policy recommendation sections into just one cloth of words, all these subjects appear. So we have education, employment, housing, environment, but all of these words are dominated by the word opportunities. So thank you very much for your attention, and I leave you here with the QR from which you can download the RED 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burnell. Please, another round of applause. That was fascinating. Very interesting to see the links between the generations and, of course, that ever-important data, which puts it in such clear context. Muy bien, gracias. Okay, next in our presentation, I'm very pleased to invite up to introduce our panel, Dr. Stacey Richards-Kennedy, who is CAF's Regional Manager for the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Protocol having been established, let me say at the onset that for me, as a Caribbean Development Finance Specialist, today's discussion of the findings of the RED report is extremely timely. Governments across the Caribbean are redoubling their efforts as we speak to boost economic activity and close the gaps that have been worsened by the pandemic. And it is critical that at the same time, we maintain a laser-sharp focus on the unfinished business of tackling poverty and inequality. And as a Caribbean national who benefited from Trinidad and Tobago's commitment to investing heavily in education since independence in 1962, being the first in my family to go to university, this issue of interrupting intergenerational poverty, disrupting persistent patterns of inequality, and providing opportunities for social mobility to many, many more Caribbean generations to come. This is not merely an academic exercise. This is personal, not just for me, but for many of us in this room, I am certain, and for many of us connected online. This RED report on inherited inequality is at the heart of what we do in CAF as development professionals. This is how we put knowledge in the service of development. Thus, it's my honor to introduce our esteemed panel today who will delve more deeply into the findings of the RED publication, the applicability to and the nuances of the Caribbean context, and the implications for policy and investment decisions. The panel will be moderated by my dear CAF colleague, Mr. Ernesto Shargrodsky, Director of Socioeconomic Studies in our Knowledge Management team. Joining him are three colleagues working at the regional level in the three main areas of the report: human capital, development, labor markets, and access to assets and wealth through a gender lens. So I'll start with Mr. Dennis Zulu. Please feel free to come up. Mr. Zulu is the Director of the International Labour Organization, Office of the United Nations, based in the Caribbean. He's a stalwart of the ILO, having led several development projects on employment, creation, entrepreneurship development, microfinance, and social dialogue for the ILO in Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. He has also been ILO's representative to ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. Mr. Zulu is a graduate of the University of Zambia, Stellenbosch University, South Africa, and Mzumbe University in Tanzania. Secondly, we have Ms. Tawny Broadber, who is the representative of UN Women's Multi-Country Office in the Caribbean. She is passionately She has passionately advanced the UN's gender program in Fiji, South Africa, and Haiti, and has lectured on international relations and development studies in China. Tani, would you join us on stage, please? You're bringing them up. Sorry about that. Okay. She is a fellow alumna of the University of the West Indies and also a graduate of the London School of Economics and ESADE Business School in Barcelona. Representing the Vice Chancellor of the Caribbean's Regional University, the University of the West Indies, is Professor Clive Landis, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal of the UWI Cave Hill campus here in Barbados. Professor Landis is a professor of cardiovascular research and assumed the role of Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus in August 2021. He previously served as Deputy Principal of the Cave Hill campus and as Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Board for Undergraduate Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over to Alex and to Ernesto, please join me in showing a tremendous appreciation to our distinguished panel of experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Richards Kennedy. How powerful your own personal story, and you were doing this beautifully. And perhaps this is redundant now, but thank you very much. Can we give a round of applause to Dr. Richards Kennedy, CAF's Regional Manager of the Caribbean. Now it is time for a panel discussion, so please join me in welcoming them. Firstly, our moderator, Dr. Ernesto Szargrodzki. He's the Director of Socioeconomic Studies at CAF. And of course, the speakers of this panel, introduced so beautifully by Dr. Richards Kennedy, Mr. Dennis Zulu, Director of ILO Office for the Caribbean, Ms. Tawny Broadber, Representative of UN Women, a multi-country office of the Caribbean, and Professor Clive Landis, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal, University of the West Indies Cave Hill Campus. Thank you. Mr. Moderator, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much. It is really a pleasure being here, and I thank all the attendants, all protocols having been fulfilled. I want to start this discussion, which is very important for us because we produce every year this RED report, this report on economic development for Latin America and now the Caribbean. But obviously, in each country that we present the report, there are people who know much more about the region, the sub-region and the country than we know. So the idea of these panels is to bring the discussion to the reality and the situation of each of the CAF country members, and also try to discuss a little bit more about the policy challenges that each country faces in order to improve on the dimensions discussed and on the issues discussed in each report. Let me start with Professor Clive Landis. And as you have seen, our report does not study inequality in a static way, but it looks at the intergenerational transmission of inequality. One question is, what do we learn, for example, in particular for the Caribbean countries, from this approach? And let me also ask you, at the same time, given the time constraints, something that the report discusses is that there is usually a trade-off between inequality and growth, or there could be a trade-off in some dimension. For example, if taxes are increased in order to finance redistributive policies, that may affect growth. But it is also true that there are other win-win relationships. For example, if improving equality gives better access to employment opportunities, then there will be a better allocation of talent in a society, and a university we know is very important for that. For example, if there are better opportunities for social mobility, then this is a message for the youth to provide effort. For example, when being a university student. So let me ask you also about the relationship between how to improve equality and improve growth at the same time.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and all protocols observed. Still, please let me acknowledge the Prime Minister and the Executive President of CAF, Cabinet members, and my fellow panelists. I am actually here representing the University of the West Indies, and I have to begin by conveying regrets from the Vice-Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, who couldn't be here today. He had wanted to, but I think you know the difficulties with interregional travel. They intervened. Just for the visitors from CAF, let me also just say that this is an important regional, indigenous regional institution, which is enduring and an ethical institution. We have a very clear developmental mission. We never waver from this, and that is to help develop human capital through our teaching and through our research to help the positive transformation of the Caribbean. So to go to your question, first of all, this report is an outstanding report. So when speaking in terms of the University of the West Indies, I welcome it. As a researcher, I love it. I mean, this report, which has pulled together multiple data sets over the span of decades and has then managed to delve into intergenerational inequalities, this is an unusual analysis. And everyone in this room, I want you to understand, I think this is going to be a seminal report, and people will use the terms of inherited inequalities from this point forward. What can we do from the educator's perspective to help promote growth? I think you had said, what is a win-win? Well, let me tell you what is a win-win, and that is to invest in education. And from my perspective, this university has for 55 years out of 60 years of our existence here on the Cave Hill campus has invested in education in the sense that education was free for Barbadians for their first degree. And it is no accident that the sort of positives that you saw in relation to the human development of Barbados in comparison to other countries, it reflects the fact that we typically will put between 50 to 65% of our population will have access and will participate in higher education beyond secondary school level. And I will end by quoting a very important analysis by an economist. I know that you're an economist as well. Professor Winston Moore, who is the deputy principal of the Cave Hill campus. He is a stalwart, having been in the central bank. I'm sure you know him as well, Minister Strawn. Professor Moore has analyzed the value of the investment by Barbados in our university. And Barbados invests a lot in our university. It's around about $95 million per year. But the return on investment is $342 million contributed to the Barbadian economy. So this return on investment is a typical calculation that is done for universities. And in most sort of universities in North America, it'd be between 2 and 2.5 times. But in Barbados, it is 3.5 times the return on investment. And this would be from persons who, I love the concept introduced decades ago by Sir Hilary Beckles of one graduate in every household. Stacey has just demonstrated the transformative effect that that has. And so the investment in tertiary education is an investment that is worth it. And that is a win-win.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Clay. Let me ask now Tony, Representative Tony Broadberg. The report analyzes inequalities in general, but also regarding certain population groups such as women, certain ethnic and racial groups, and also residents of disadvantaged areas. I want to ask you, how would you describe, in the case of the Caribbean, the barriers to access to education and to good employment opportunities for these groups? And also for making a comparison between the Caribbean, that I know less, and Latin America. In Latin America, there has been large improvements in the access of women to education, but not yet to employment. So that better education does not yet reflect in better employment opportunity for women. I wonder whether that is also the case in this region. And finally, also for the case of women, I would like to ask you about the situation, or the particular situation regarding policies for childcare, for maternal care, and for the prevention of teenage pregnancy.
That was a lot. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, in 5 minutes, all protocols observed. I think I'll break it into 3 parts. If we're looking at access to quality education, we need to really be clear about what it is we mean by quality education. And start from even before. I'm a proud graduate of the University of the West Indies, but I would say we need to start before tertiary education, secondary education, and primary education to childcare, early childhood education. It has been proven globally that children who are engaged in early childhood education generally have a better life trajectory. Those who weren't are 70% more likely to engage in crime. The Caribbean is one of the most unequal spaces, Latin America and the Caribbean, and it is also one of the most crime-ridden spaces in the world. Are these 2 things causal? Are they at least correlated? We know that early childhood education is one way in which we can address this. And what we have found is that in communities and countries like Barbados that have invested in subsidized childcare from early childhood education levels, women have more time to engage in the formal economy. Across the board, women are more educated, certified in the Caribbean than men are. That is not translating into employment. So in Barbados, we have 60, I believe it is 55% women engaged in the labor force, as opposed to 63% men. And if you look at the data we have in the Caribbean for about 6 countries, it's 35% to 55% women engaged in our economies versus more like 57% to 67% men. And this is across all of the different, whether it's primary education, secondary education, or tertiary education. So we need to be looking at what some of those barriers are for women in particular into employment. We do have, again, Barbados has been a first mover when it comes to an enabling environment in terms of a workplace, in terms of sexual harassment legislation. But this is something we need to look at across the board in the region. And beyond that, what are women becoming educated in? Are they the growth sectors? Are we promoting growth sectors for women and men in terms of their education? And are we promoting vocational education in the way that we should? The other issue that becomes a barrier, I spoke briefly to it, is time use and that unpaid care that women end up taking a lot of responsibility for. We have pioneered research in Grenada that shows 4 hours of women's time per day is on unpaid childcare versus 1 hour and 51 minutes for men. I'll say 2 hours for men. But this is something that prevents your full engagement. Even when it comes to managerial positions, yes, countries like St. Lucia and Jamaica and Barbados have very high levels of managers, women as managers, but many of those women are managing one person themselves. So we're not looking at sustainable businesses in terms of management either. So that's the quality education, access to employment. The Prime Minister spoke a bit to this notion of that social mobility in schools and mixing, this inherited inequality that we have in the region linked to colonialism and slavery. We are going to be celebrating the day in the remembrance of the African slave trade, and that's the same day that the revolution in Haiti began, the 22nd of August. What we need to be looking at as well is, where are people being able to be socially mobile? Are we mixing our schools, our public and our private institutions? Are we ensuring that the extracurricular activities, because one thing the report spoke to was the socio-emotional skills. Are we providing quality education in socio-emotional skills as well as English, math? And are we looking at technology in the way that we need to if we want to get to digital? So these are some of the quality education, the access to education issues, and also the employment. In terms of the policies that are working, I would say we need to have about a four-pronged approach. One is already being practiced in Barbados, which is investment in unpaid care work relief. Subsidized child care. Barbados has invested more, other than Trinidad and Tobago, 3.92% of Barbados's GDP goes to social protection. That is the second highest in the Caribbean for the data that we have. That's excellent. What we need to see now is that expansion, maternal and paternity leave being expanded in our region. That's one. The second is education, going beyond English and math. We just got common entry results yesterday, and some children are not very happy. If those children come from wealthy households, they will be okay. If they don't, will they slip through the cracks? These are things we need to start looking at in the way we assess our success in education. The other is sexual reproductive health and rights. If women can't choose what they're doing with their bodies, it is going to be difficult for them to fully engage. And right now, our teenage pregnancy rates across Latin America and the Caribbean are at 52%. In Belize, it's at 74%. The Caribbean is higher than Latin America for the data that UNFPA has on this. So we really need to start looking at comprehensive sexuality education and not being afraid by a certain narrative that speaks to this only being around sexual orientation and gender identity. It is not. It is very broad, and it is important because clearly our children are engaging in sexual relations. They need to be able to make informed decisions. And the last aspect of it is really looking at that social cohesion and socio-emotional aspect, and how we can start doing the mental work that the Prime Minister spoke to around the way in which we treat one another and value our space. We have a problem of high migration, and it's mainly women migrating out of our region. How can we make this space the place that our ancestors meant for it to be? They were able to, as the Prime Minister said, I wrote it down, the glory of being resilient. They were resilient. How can we make this space one in which people want to stay and thrive? And those are the four policy aspects I think we need to prioritize.
Really super interesting, Tony. Very, very interesting. And also the comparison in some issues with the situation in Latin America. Let me ask you now, Director Denis Zulu, as we saw, the RED organizes a discussion on these inherited inequalities, focusing on three channels. One is the formation of human capital or education. Second is job opportunities. And the third one is the access to savings opportunities. In your opinion, I mean, what is the importance of these channels for the reproduction of inequalities in the Caribbean context? And in particular, based on your experience, I would like to ask you about the role of the job market, of the labor market in this reproduction of inequalities. And focusing even more on issues in the labor market, I would like to ask you about the informality, which is a main issue in Latin America, but I would like to ask you about the levels of labor informality in the Caribbean and which policies could address that, that concern.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm not hearing myself. Yeah? Okay. So good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to be here. All protocols observed. And usually when the challenge arises when you're the last to speak and people have spoken before you, so you really have to see if you can bring something unique or add value to the discussion. So I think it's generally acknowledged that I think when you don't have a sound foundation, then everything else falls apart. And when you look at the three channels that have been addressed, and you look at the formation of human capital and this relationship to employment and ultimately to accessing and acquiring assets, you see a direct link there. But that link would tend to sort of become weaker and weaker if you do not have the foundation where you started from. And the foundation really is about education, which we've been talking about. It's about getting or preparing skills that will be demanded in the labor market. A lot of time we hear about skills and skills and skills, but if you go around the Caribbean, there's quite a lot of educated people, educated, but not skilled and not getting jobs, because that's a challenge. The private sector is looking for specific skills which are not being churned out, if I may use the term, by our training institutions. I think as a result of that, you'll see that if you do not get the right skills, then obviously your fortunes in terms of graduating into a good job and ultimately acquiring the assets that you need to move away from the inequalities is weakened. Now, obviously, the interesting thing about the report is that it does to a great deal, and this is wonderful work, that there are a lot of challenges that are associated with getting human capital formation. And as my colleagues have stated, if as a young child you do not have, or you belong to this socioeconomic class that does not have the resources for you to go to a good school, and then obviously you do not have good opportunities to get to a job and ultimately get assets. And therefore, the link is there to say that human capital formation is critical if you're going to graduate into jobs and ultimately acquire assets. Now, as we are forming a human capital, and there's evidence across the world that says that if you invest in education, and the Prime Minister did allude to the fact that Barbados has invested substantially into education. And this, as I said, there's evidence so that this has led to development. Singapore, a classic example, and many other parts of the world. So in as far as responding to the question, yes, I basically feel that the first channel, which is that of human capital formation, is critical because you can see direct linkages there. If you do not have the skills, you can't get a job. If you do not have the skills, you cannot manage yourself to the extent that you manage your business to acquire the assets. And when we're talking about skills, it's a lifelong process. It's not just about the initial start, it's a whole process. And also when you're talking about skills, how do we get partnerships, private sector, so that we move away from this sad situation? It's quite large around the Caribbean, where you have, as I said, young, educated Caribbean, male and females, but not being able to get the jobs that the private sector have, but cannot fill because there's a mismatch there. And one way of dealing with is in a lot of times we say in the ILO, I think we need to move away from training for jobs, but training to create jobs. Because in a lot of cases, we train our young people who go out there applying every day for jobs, which in the truest sense are not there. But then how do we use this as an opportunity through their skill acquisition process to give them the ability to run businesses, employ fellow young people, and grow their businesses? That's what we need to be doing more and more. And therefore, that's critical. Now, the second aspect of the question is, what about informality? The informality bit comes in because the young people and even older people do not get jobs. So what do? They go to the informal economy because that for them is an avenue within which they can use to raise incomes to sustain themselves. So you'll see in the Caribbean and across the Caribbean, informality accounts for somewhere between 20 to 44%, 50% across the Caribbean, depending on where you are. And really the informality aspect of it comes in because it's the only sort of outlet or opportunity that exists for a lot of people who can't get the jobs. Now, that in itself is not a good thing because, as you know, when you're working in the informal economy, you basically have a precarious job, you do not have access to social insurance, you do not have occupational safety standards being adhered to by the person who's running the business and other sort of things. But even more, the informal economy doesn't pay taxes. So you do not create the opportunity for government to realize taxes to be able to pay back and invest in education and contribute to having a kind of young people and men who can then contribute effectively to the economy. So the linkage is there, and as long as we do not address the drivers into the informal economy, one being the lack of jobs, secondly, what drives young people in the economy, it could be policy constraints, too much certification requirements by government for this and that. It could be the lack of access to capital or finance to support the businesses. It could even be access, the regulatory regime. So those are the sort of things we need to address, and you can only address those through having policy prescriptions that facilitate a just transition from the informal economy to the formal economy. So we need to be working with the informal economy and addressing the issues that they've identified as challenges so that we can eventually graduate them into some sort of formality, which is basically a win-win for all. And those who can move all the way to formality, well and good. So I'll stop and engage in further discussions.
Thank you very much, Dennis. We have a time constraint, but I hope we can continue our discussion. But thank you very much. And again, a great pleasure being here and bringing the discussion to the particular issues of the country and the region. Thank you very much.
Hear me? We are. Thank you so much to our panelists. Very interesting exchange and insightful conversation surrounded these inherited inequalities. Now we have two sets of closing remarks for this event, but I would like to welcome first the Honorable Ryan Strong, Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment. Minister, thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Protocol having clearly been established. My job here is fairly straightforward at this stage because I believe we have been treated to a very engaging set of presentations and discussions this morning. But I really want to thank the President of CAF and his team and all of you who have come here this morning to participate in this event. Now, this really is a journey upon which I think the bank has helped to support Barbados as we execute the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program. The issues addressed here this morning are multidimensional. We've had a series of discussions about how the government on its current trajectory intends to respond to many of the challenges that are here. But we look forward really to continuing the engagement, not just with the bank, but certainly with the stakeholders across the length and breadth of Barbados. Because this report, not just timely, should remind us that we must redouble our efforts now to be able to respond to the challenges that clearly continue to confront us. And as you heard the Prime Minister say very clearly, the only way forward really is to ensure that there is a coalition of the willing who are focused on solving problems for ordinary people. And that is what the government intends to continue to focus on, because whatever type of reform is necessary to be able to ensure that we can have an accumulation of wealth across generations and have that wealth passed on is the only way that we're going to truly transform the Caribbean civilization as we know it. And therefore, our efforts, along with those in the private sector, along with those in the multilateral development system like CAF here today, will be important for allowing us to be able to respond to those myriad of challenges. Now, one of the things that we clearly believe that we need to break down some of the barriers between the Caribbean and Latin America is really language. Now, Spanish is supposed to be our second language in Barbados, but the reality is that we don't necessarily use that to communicate with those who are closest to us. And I believe that amongst all of the things that we have to focus on to have greater integration, not just in the Caribbean, but certainly between Latin America and the Caribbean, in order to reduce those inequalities, is for us to be better able to communicate with each other in a very practical sense. And therefore, that is going to be one of the things that we as a government continue to focus on, because unless we're able to break down those barriers and to close any misinformation gaps, then whether it's at a university, whether it's in business, then we will not be able to fulfill, I think, truly our mission of being able to close those gaps across the region. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I could go on and on and on about the issues that are confronting this country. But I believe, as we have just been able to address with respect to the reform within the context of our national insurance system and social security, the reality is every government must ensure that you do not leave problems for the next generation to fix. And therefore, you must always be looking forward 2 or 3 generations, setting them up with a baton that you pass to them that makes their work a little easier, because you've been able to solve systemic problems through the generations. And the concept of overlapping generations, certainly within the Caribbean context, especially within families, is an important element for us to understand how we're going to break down these barriers of inherited inequalities. And therefore, as the government responds in its own way to solving some of those problems, the opportunity to work with the private sector and to work with stakeholders across the NGO sector is going to be important for allowing us to break down those barriers. The reality is that today, education still remains a key component of how we are able to close some of these challenges. But it is how we are going to apply that knowledge in the 21st century in order to ensure that each Barbadian student, each student across the Caribbean, each child across Latin America and the Caribbean, how they apply that knowledge to be able to work seamlessly together cross-border, to be able to build relationships across the region, is what is going to help achieve scale in order to bring meaningful solutions to the lives of ordinary citizens. And I really want to thank CAF for working with us to be able to get to this particular stage. And certainly we look forward really to more intense engagement, not just with the bank, but with stakeholders. As government does its part, the university and others will do their part, the business community will do their part to ensure that we can reduce systemically these inherited inequalities. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Strawn. Wonderful remarks, and I am so impressed all the time. I see you follow in the footsteps of your Prime Minister of speaking without notes. Hablando de la corazón. Muy bien. And super impresionante. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to invite to the stage Dr. Christian Asinelli. He's the Corporate Vice President of Strategic Planning of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. Mr. Asinelli. You were so quick.
Thank you, Alex. Well, good morning to everyone. Thank you all for your presence on what has been the presentation on our flag report on economic development. Today is an historical day in the relationship between CAF and Barbados. I would like to thank Executive President Sergio Díaz-Granado and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, for making this possible. I think that today is really very important for us. Also, thanks Minister Ryan Starbuck. We are working very closely with you, your team, and we are very happy to continue in this path. Our regional manager for the Caribbean, Stacey Richard Kennedy, part of this work is because of you. Thank you very much, Stacey. Obviously, our team, Ernesto Jordowski, Lucila Bernier. Thank you to the panelists for your question, your ideas. I think that was very helpful for all of us. And thank you, all of you. It's a great honor to be here in Barbados. First, because our commitment, as our president of CAF said before, to integration process in the Caribbean that consolidated 1 year ago through the opening of a regional office in Trinidad and Tobago with Stacey. That space allows us to provide greater support for economic recovery and sustainable development for Caribbean countries, and we will work together to develop projects that will improve access to water, reduce transportation time, provide more opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprise in microfinance and foreign trade, and promote public policies on gender inclusion and diversity, among other subjects. Second, because we aim to provide better living conditions for all the people on Latin America and the Caribbean through more educational and employment opportunities and by leveling economic conditions and just distribution of wealth. One example of our work in that sense is the educational quality program in Trinidad and Tobago that will be approved soon and will contribute with $40 million to improve the quality and relevance of the country's educational systems. And third, because we stand for and defend the institutional generation of knowledge. Why? Because we are not only a development bank that offers financial support to private and public sector, and we do not only improve habitat, environment, energy infrastructure, and climate change adaptation intervention. We also generate knowledge to strengthen those public policies and improve the social and economic impact of the project we promote. That is the reason why reports like the one we are presenting today are so important for us. We also have several training initiatives and programs that seek to promote social experimentation as public management tools, our diploma in governance and public innovation, our diploma in finance and inclusion, and our L Generation program from the youth are only 3 examples of these initiatives, and we plan on continuing all our programs and develop new ones, especially here in Barbados. Our report on economic development seeks to understand inequality and lack of opportunity in Latin America and the Caribbean from a broad and regional perspective. And there is a specific term that the report used to illustrate this situation that is really interesting and clear. It's the Great Gatsby curve. The Great Gatsby curve refers to the relationship between inequality and social mobility. What it really does is showing that high income inequality tends to be related to low upward economic mobility between one generation to the next. And what is also shown is that without social mobility, the patterns of inequality are repeated. Kids maintain the level education of their parents, they inherit their labor skills, and they persist on the same income levels. That is where the 3 contributions of the RED 2022 take relevance. Early intervention during the first decade of life, improving labor market, and providing more opportunities for everyone in our region. From now on, the success of our daily work has to be measured by our capability to transform those three contributions into a reality for the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. Progress, intergenerational mobility, social education, and economic equality in our region depend on that, and they represent the great challenge of this century. I hope this report helps us find a new and innovative solution toward this goal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asinelli. The Great Gatsby Curve, just fascinating, very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of CAF, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, on behalf of the government of Barbados, I want to thank you all for attending, including those of you attending online. Thank you to our special guests, our panelists, and online audience. You'll have a little bookmark on your table. Remember, CAF's Red Report is available for download. That QR code should take you right there, and you can download that. And of course, you can visit the website, which is scioteca.caf.com, and that's SCIOTECA, SCIOTECA, scioteca.caf.com. So on behalf of everyone, thank you so much, and please have a wonderful day.